Once upon a time, in a small village called Umuroko, there was a young man named Mazi. Mazi lived with his mother in a tiny hut. This hut was very old and small, left behind by Mazi's father when he went to join the ancestors. Mazi and his mother were poor. Every day, Mazi went to the market to sell beads. These beads were very pretty, but the money Mazi made from selling them was very little. It was so little that sometimes there wasn't enough food for Mazi and his mother to eat. Mazi's friends from when he was a child had all grown up to be rich men. They had big houses, wives, and children. But Mazi was different. He was still poor, still living in the tiny hut, and still all alone. His friends didn't visit him anymore because they had their own busy lives. Every morning, Mazi would wake up, put on his old clothes, and walk to the market. He hoped that one day things would get better. But day after day, it was always the same. Mazi remained poor, and his heart grew heavy with sadness. And so, the days went on in the little village of Umuroko, with Mazi selling his beads, wishing for a better life, but nothing seemed to change. One bright morning, Mazi was walking to the market like he did every day. He carried a big basket full of beads on his head. The road was dusty, and Mazi was deep in thought, wondering how he would make enough money to feed himself and his mother. Suddenly, Mazi's foot hit a big stone on the road. He tripped and fell down hard. The basket of beads flew off his head, and all the beads scattered everywhere on the ground. Mazi was shocked and embarrassed. The villagers who were nearby saw what happened. Instead of helping him, they started to laugh. They pointed at him and whispered to each other. "Look at him," one of the women said, "still selling beads like a woman. All his mates are rich, and here he is, poor and wretched." Mazi's face turned red with shame. He quickly got up and started picking up the beads from the ground. But the more he picked, the more he heard the villagers laughing and making fun of him. Each word they said felt like a heavy stone in his heart. Finally, Mazi gathered all the beads and put them back in his basket. He held his head down and walked to the market, but the laughter and the mean words kept playing in his mind. Even when he reached the market and set up his small stall, Mazi couldn't forget how embarrassed and sad he felt. The whole day, his heart was heavy, and he couldn't smile or talk to anyone. Mazi felt very alone, and the sadness stayed with him long after the sun had set. Mazi was having a tough time making enough money from selling his beads. Often, the money he earned wasn't enough to feed him and his mother. So, Mazi had to borrow money from people in the village just to get by. One day, Mazi borrowed some money from his friend Kali. Kali loved money more than anything else. He never liked to wait when someone owed him. Mazi promised to pay Kali back in a few days, but when the time came, Mazi didn't have enough money to repay him. Early one morning, before the sun was fully up, Kali went straight to Mazi's little shop in the market. He didn't wait for Mazi to open his stall. He started shouting loudly, "Mazi, where is my money? Pay me now!" His voice was so loud that all the other traders and people in the market heard him. Mazi was just setting up his beads when he saw Kali. He knew he was in trouble. Mazi begged Kali, saying, "Please, give me a little more time. I will pay you soon, I promise." But Kali was very angry. He didn't care about Mazi's troubles. He was so angry that he slapped Mazi right there in front of everyone. The slap was loud, and Mazi's cheeks stung with pain. The people in the market were shocked. They saw how sad and helpless Mazi looked. Some of them felt sorry for him. A few kind traders came over and gave Mazi a little money to help him pay Kali back. Mazi was so grateful, but inside he felt so small and ashamed. After paying Kali, Mazi sat quietly in his stall. He couldn't believe what had just happened. The day went by slowly, and Mazi's heart was heavy with sadness and frustration. He couldn't understand why life was so hard for him. He was tired of being poor and tired of being treated badly by others. That day, Mazi went home feeling more hopeless than ever. Mazi had reached a point where he couldn't take it anymore. He was tired of being poor, tired of people looking down on him. One day, he decided to visit his childhood friend, Nedu. Nedu was now a rich man, respected by everyone in the village. Mazi hoped that maybe Nedu could help him. Mazi walked to Nedu's big house. When he arrived, he knocked on the door, feeling nervous. Nedu opened the door and saw Mazi standing there. But instead of welcoming him, Nedu looked at Mazi's old clothes and dirty shoes. Nedu didn't even shake Mazi's hand. He said, "I don't want your poverty to rub off on me." Mazi felt a deep shame in his heart, but he swallowed his pride and told Nedu why he had come. "Nedu, I want to be rich like you. I'm tired of being poor. Please, help me." Nedu looked at Mazi for a moment. Then he said, "If you're really ready to do anything, I can help you. But remember, no one should ever know where your money comes from." Nedu's words were serious, and Mazi felt a chill run down his spine, but he was desperate. Nedu then reached into his pocket and pulled out some money. He handed it to Mazi and said, "This is just the beginning. But be careful, Mazi. Once you start, there's no turning back." Mazi took the money, feeling a mix of excitement and fear. He thanked Nedu, even though his heart was heavy with the weight of Nedu's warning. As Mazi left Nedu's house, he couldn't help but wonder what he had gotten himself into. But for now, Mazi was happy. He had money in his pocket, and he thought that maybe, just maybe, things were finally starting to change for him. Mazi was so happy with the money Nedu had given him. It felt like his troubles were finally over. He went straight to the market and bought lots of food, more than he had ever bought before. That evening, he cooked a big meal, the kind he and his mother hadn't had in a very long time. As they sat down to eat, Mazi's mother looked at all the food in surprise. "My son, where did you get the money to buy all this?" she asked. Mazi didn't want to tell her the truth, so he lied. "The gods of our land have smiled on me, Mama," he said, smiling. "They have blessed me." His mother nodded slowly, though she looked a bit worried. "Be careful, my son," she said softly, but Mazi was too excited to listen. A few days later, Mazi went back to Nedu's house, eager to know what to do next. Nedu didn't waste any time. He took Mazi to see the chief priest, a man who was known for his mysterious powers. The chief priest looked at Mazi with piercing eyes and said, "I see a bright future for you, but you must be ready to do what it takes." Mazi, feeling a little scared but determined, nodded. "I'm ready," he said. The chief priest then told Mazi what he needed to do. "Bring me 2 white cockerels," the priest said. "We will perform a ritual, and after that, your journey to wealth will begin." Mazi quickly went to the market and bought the 2 white cockerels. He brought them back to the chief priest, who performed the ritual late at night. The air was thick with smoke and strange words that Mazi didn't understand. He felt both scared and excited at the same time. The next morning, when Mazi woke up, he couldn't believe his eyes. Right beside his bed were 2 bundles of money, just like the chief priest had said. Mazi's heart raced with joy. He had never seen so much money in his life. He quickly thanked the gods and started planning how he would expand his business and change his life. For the first time in a long time, Mazi went to the market with a light heart. He felt like he was finally on the path to becoming a rich and respected man, just like his friend Nedu. But deep down, he knew this was just the beginning of something much bigger, something that might be more dangerous than he could imagine. Mazi was overjoyed with the money he found beside his bed. He felt like he was finally on his way to becoming a rich man. Without wasting any time, Mazi hurried back to the chief priest's shrine to share the good news. When he arrived, the chief priest was waiting for him. Mazi, still filled with excitement, told the priest about the money. But the chief priest didn't smile. Instead, he looked at Mazi with serious eyes and said, "This is only the beginning, Mazi. If you want to become truly rich, there is one more sacrifice you must make." Mazi's heart skipped a beat. He was expecting something simple, but when the chief priest told him what was required, Mazi's excitement turned into fear. "You must bring me the heart of someone who shares your blood," the chief priest said, his voice as cold as the night. Mazi's eyes widened in shock. "But I have no relatives, no brothers or sisters," Mazi said, trying to find a way out. The thought of taking someone's heart made him feel sick. The chief priest's gaze didn't waver. "You have your mother," he said quietly, "the one who shares your blood. You have 3 days to decide, Mazi. If you do not bring the heart, you will either die or go mad. The choice is yours." Mazi's world seemed to collapse around him. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. His mother was the only person who had ever cared for him, and now he was being asked to do something unthinkable. The chief priest's words echoed in his mind as Mazi walked back home, his feet heavy with dread. 3 days, that was all he had, and in those 3 days, Mazi would have to make the hardest decision of his life. As he reached his small hut, Mazi saw his mother waiting for him with a warm meal, her face full of love and concern. But Mazi couldn't look her in the eyes. The weight of the decision pressed down on him like a heavy stone, and he knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Mazi was trapped in a terrible situation. After the chief priest told him he had to take his mother's life to become rich, Mazi was filled with fear and confusion. He didn't know what to do. The thought of hurting his mother was like a dark cloud that hung over him. But the fear of dying or going mad was just as frightening. That night, Mazi couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned in his bed, his mind racing with horrible thoughts. "How can I do this to my own mother?" he whispered to himself, tears filling his eyes. But then, the chief priest's warning echoed in his mind. "You have 3 days, Mazi. If you do not bring the heart, you will either die or go mad." Mazi's heart was heavy with fear. During the day, he tried to act normal, but inside he was breaking apart. His mother noticed that something was wrong. "My son, you seem troubled. What is bothering you?" she asked gently. But Mazi couldn't tell her the truth. He just shook his head and said, "It's nothing, Mama. I'm just tired." But it wasn't just tiredness. It was the weight of an impossible choice. For 2 days, Mazi lived in deep fear and sadness. He could barely eat, and he couldn't bring himself to smile. The days seemed to drag on forever, and the deadline given by the chief priest loomed over him like a dark shadow. Mazi spent his time alone, thinking about what he should do. Should he choose his own life, or should he save his mother? The thought of losing her made him feel like he was being torn apart inside. but the fear of dying or going mad was just as strong. As the second day came to an end, Mazi knew he was running out of time. He felt trapped, with no escape in sight. He knew that whatever choice he made, there would be no turning back. The fear of what lay ahead filled his heart, and he wished with all his might that he could wake up from this terrible nightmare. But the night was dark, and Mazi knew that soon he would have to make his decision. The third day arrived, and with it came a decision that Mazi never thought he would make. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a pale light over the village. Mazi's heart was pounding in his chest, and his hands were shaking as he picked up the machete. His mind was a storm of fear, guilt, and desperation. He moved quietly through the small hut to his mother's room. His mother was still asleep, her face peaceful and calm. Mazi stood there for a moment, his heart breaking at the sight. But the chief priest's words echoed in his mind. If you do not bring the heart, you will either die or go mad. With a heavy heart, Mazi raised the machete. Tears streamed down his face as he struck his mother, the woman who had always cared for him, who had always loved him. The room was silent except for the sound of Mazi's sobs. He couldn't believe what he had done, but he knew there was no going back. Mazi's hands were trembling as he took his mother's heart and placed it in a calabash. He felt numb, like he was trapped in a terrible dream. But he told himself, "This is what makes me a man. I had no choice." With the calabash in his hands, Mazi ran as fast as he could to the chief priest's shrine. His clothes were stained with his mother's blood, and his heart was pounding with fear and regret. He hoped that by completing the ritual, everything would be over, that he would finally become rich, and that this nightmare would end. But as Mazi reached the shrine, a deep dread settled in his chest. The weight of what he had done pressed down on him, and he felt a cold emptiness inside. He had made his choice, but the cost was far greater than he had ever imagined. He got to the chief priest's shrine, clutching the calabash that held his mother's heart. His hands were trembling, and his clothes were soaked with blood. He hoped that this terrible act would finally bring him the wealth he had been promised. But when Mazi entered the shrine, he stopped dead in his tracks. The chief priest was lying on the ground, motionless. His eyes were closed, and his chest no longer rose and fell with breath. The chief priest was dead. Mazi's heart sank into a pit of despair. He had killed his own mother, and now the only person who could complete the ritual was gone. All his hopes, all his dreams of becoming rich had crumbled into dust. He had done the unthinkable for nothing. Mazi fell to his knees in front of the shrine, the calabash still in his hands. Tears streamed down his face as he realized the full horror of what he had done. "What have I done?" he whispered, his voice shaking with grief and regret. His cries echoed through the quiet morning air, reaching the ears of the villagers nearby. They had heard his screams and rushed to the shrine to see what was happening. As they arrived, they were met with a shocking sight. Mazi, covered in blood, sitting hopelessly in front of the shrine with a calabash in front of him. The villagers gasped in horror and disbelief. They whispered among themselves, wondering what could have led to such a terrible scene. Some of them moved closer, peering inside the calabash. When they saw what was inside, they recoiled in shock and fear. The truth began to spread quickly through the crowd. "Mazi has killed his own mother," they whispered. The news spread like wildfire, and soon the entire village knew what had happened. Mazi, broken and devastated, could do nothing but sit there in his sorrow, surrounded by the horrified whispers of the villagers. His life, once filled with hope for a better future, had turned into a nightmare from which there was no escape. The weight of his actions crushed him, and he realized that he had lost everything: his mother, his honor, and even his own soul. The villagers were filled with horror and anger when they realized what Mazi had done. The idea that someone could kill their own mother was too terrible to believe, but there it was, right in front of them. The shock quickly turned into a burning desire for justice. The villagers couldn't let such an evil deed go unpunished. They grabbed Mazi, who was too broken and defeated to resist, and dragged him to the village square. His feet dragged on the ground as they led him to face the elders. The villagers shouted angrily, demanding that Mazi be held accountable for his terrible crime. When they reached the village square, the elders were called to gather. These wise men were the ones who decided what was right and wrong in the village. The villagers pushed Mazi forward, and he stood in front of the elders, his head hanging low. His clothes were still stained with blood, and his eyes were filled with sorrow. One of the elders, with a deep and commanding voice, asked, "Mazi, is it true that you have killed your own mother?" Mazi, his voice barely above a whisper, nodded and said, "Yes, it is true." He then confessed everything, telling the elders how he had been consumed by the desire for wealth, how the chief priest had promised him riches in exchange for a terrible sacrifice, and how, in his desperation, he had chosen to take his mother's life. As Mazi spoke, the villagers listened in silence, their anger growing with every word. When he finished, the air was thick with tension. The elders looked at one another, their faces grim. The village had never seen a crime so grave, and the people wanted justice. The crowd erupted in angry shouts. "He must be punished! He must pay for what he has done!" they cried. The villagers were filled with fury and demanded that Mazi be killed for his crime. They couldn't imagine letting someone who had committed such an atrocity live among them. The elders listened to the cries of the people. They knew that what Mazi had done was unforgivable, and they understood the villagers' demand for justice. The elders began to discuss among themselves, knowing that the decision they made would have to be one that satisfied the people's thirst for justice, while also honoring the traditions and laws of their village. All eyes were on the elders as they deliberated, waiting for the fate of Mazi to be decided. As the elders listened to Mazi's confession, one of them leaned forward and asked, "Mazi, who led you to do such an evil thing? Who put this dark idea in your mind?" Mazi, with tears in his eyes and his voice trembling, answered, "It was Nedu. He told me he could make me rich, just like him. He took me to the chief priest and said I had to do whatever it took to become wealthy." The villagers gasped in shock. Nedu was a respected man in the village, known for his wealth and power. But now, they learned that his riches were built on terrible secrets. The elders immediately sent for Nedu, and he was brought to the village square, his face pale and nervous. When Nedu stood before the elders, they demanded the truth. "Nedu, is it true? Did you lead Mazi down this dark path? Did you make him kill his own mother for wealth?" Nedu hesitated, but he saw the angry faces of the villagers and knew he couldn't lie. With a deep sigh, he confessed, "Yes, it is true. I showed Mazi the way to the chief priest, but I am not innocent myself. I have done worse things. I used my first daughter for rituals to gain my wealth, and others have disappeared because of me." The villagers were furious. They couldn't believe that Nedu, who they had admired for his riches, was capable of such evil. Some of them picked up stones, ready to punish Nedu right there and then. "He deserves to die," they shouted. "He has brought darkness into our village." But the elders, though just as angry, knew they had to be wise. They raised their hands to calm the crowd. "No," one of the elders said firmly, "we will not kill him, but he will pay for his crimes." The elders decided that Nedu should be stripped of all his wealth. Everything he owned would be taken away, and he would be banished from the village, never to return. His family would be forced to live with him, and they would live in shame, knowing that their wealth had been built on the blood of the innocent. The villagers agreed, their anger still burning but tempered by the wisdom of the elders. They watched as Nedu was led away, his head hung low in disgrace. His beautiful house, his fine clothes, his treasures, all would be taken away, leaving him with nothing but the guilt of his terrible deeds. Nedu's downfall was a harsh lesson for the village. They saw how greed and the desire for wealth had led both Mazi and Nedu down a path of destruction. And as Nedu and his family were driven out of the village, the people were left to reflect on the cost of such dark ambitions. Even after Nedu's downfall, the villagers were still burning with anger towards Mazi. They couldn't forget that he had killed his own mother, the woman who had cared for him all his life. Many of them still demanded that Mazi be put to death for his terrible crime. But one of the elders, the wisest among them, spoke up. "Death would be too easy a punishment for Mazi," the elder said. "If we kill him, his suffering will end quickly. But what he did was so terrible that he should live with the weight of his actions for the rest of his life." The other elders nodded in agreement. They decided that Mazi would be banished from the village, just as Nedu had been. But instead of sending him away to another village, they would send him deep into the forest, where he would be alone with his pain and regret. There, Mazi would have to live with the memory of what he had done, with no comfort and no forgiveness. The villagers watched as Mazi was taken to the edge of the forest. His head was low, and his face was filled with sorrow. He knew that he would never see his village again, never feel the warmth of his mother's love again. He was alone, lost in the darkness that his greed had created. After Mazi was banished, the villagers buried his mother with great respect. She was laid to rest with prayers and tears, and the villagers vowed never to forget what had happened. To prevent such a tragedy from happening again, the elders made a new law. Anyone who wished to see the chief priest must first go through the king. The shrine would no longer be a place where people could seek wealth through dark means. With this new law in place, peace slowly returned to the village. The villagers went back to their lives, but the story of Mazi and his mother was a lesson that no one would ever forget. Parents told the story to their children, and the elders reminded the young ones of the dangers of greed and envy. Mazi's story became a warning to everyone. When you let greed take over your heart, it can destroy everything you hold dear. And in the end, the price of such greed is more than anyone can bear. I hope you enjoyed the story. If so, please like the video, comment what you learned from the tale, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more enchanting tales just like this one. Thank you.